This is the title of my paper, and this is what it will be about. It will be especially about book epigrams in Byzantine manuscripts and a database project at my university. I apologize for non-commercial advertising and for stretching a bit the chronological limits of the conference, but after all we are all quoting from a 10th century Byzantine manuscript. This is the structure. I hope I will have time for all three things, especially the second might be interesting for you. Everyone knows this epigram ascribed to Plato. It is one of the many poems on ancient authors or texts preserved in the Anthologia, mainly among the funerary and so-called epideictic epigrams. The subgenre has a long tradition and it has been practiced throughout the history of Greek literature and has been shown before. One may distinguish several types. Some deal with the author. This may be general praise, as in the Sappho distich. Some include anecdotes about the author's life, or in this case, about his death. Here we see how Bias died a sweet death in an epigraph by Diogenes Laertius. Many more epitaphs on classical authors are to be found in the Greek anthology. Homer was, of course, a very popular one since the Hellenistic period, as we have seen, and the paradox of the tomb of this great man being located at the small island of Ios has become a stock theme. Another type focuses not on the author, but on his oeuvre, or on a particular text. This is the case for a difficult poem by Callimachus on Aratus's Phenomena. The one thing that is clear is that this is a laudative poem. Callimachus clearly praises the delicate phenomena, hailing them as leptai resies. Another example is this epigram on Thucydides' Historiae. The book speaks, and it is aware of the fact that Thucydides is rather highbrow, isn't he? A final example is this clumsy poem by the Byzantine schoolmaster Komitas from around 900 AD, one generation before the compilation of the Anthologia Palatina. Komitas addresses Homer and boasts that he has restored his two books. This epigram then is not so much about the author or his oeuvre, but rather about a particular edition of the Homeric poems. It is related to the materialization of the text in the manuscript. In all examples discussed so far, the type corresponds to the real or alleged function of the epigram. Form follows function. The verses on Sappho, for instance, might have accompanied a portrait. See Aeneide. The epitaphs on Bias and Homer also have didactic elements marked in red, typical of funerary epigrams. Moreover, they use the traditional, well-known literary motifs marked in blue. The tombstone is speaking, the passerby is addressed. Yet it is obvious that the three epigrams on authors at left are bookish, in the sense that they are mere literary play, only pretending to be inscriptions. The case of the three epigrams on texts and books at the right side is more complicated, as we will see. They seem to have been a kind of epigraphs at the beginning of a book, or prefaces, or blurbs, in the case of Callimachus. Anyway, we recognize the stylistic devices known from epitaphs. The book or the author is addressed, or the book itself is addressing its ideal reader. The presence of deictic elements and the use of the first and second person are devices to enhance the vividness and to recall the original function, we could say. But they are collected and transmitted as literary epigrams. The same is true for another type of textual transmission, within the collected poems of a particular author, as part of an authored literary oeuvre, that is. This epigram is preserved in the manuscript tradition of Theodore the Studite. Gregory of Nazianzus is addressed and praised for his thundering words. In general, Theodore's poems typically served a practical, mostly monastic need. This may well have been an inscription on an icon, or an epigraph in a manuscript with theological works, but it is preserved as part of Theodore's collected poems as literature. John Geometries, who lived in the 10th century and was very well acquainted with the Anthologia Palatina, has written this epigram on the philosophers, with silly puns on their names. It seems to mimic a metrical title page of a manuscript with philosophical text, or perhaps it once really served as such. And the collected poems of the same author include also some epigrams, 3 in a row, again sequential, 3 in a row with an explicit lemma. This is one of the 3 poems John has written on the book Eastine Vivlon of Gregory of Nazianzus. Still other epigrams on author texts are known to us through indirect transmission, you know them. Diogenes Laertius and Photius, for instance, quote relevant epigrams on many occasions. The epigrams from Diogenes' text were included in the anthology. Below is the end of Photius' discussion of Lucian. He quotes the book epigram, Totis Vivlu Epigramma, that he apparently found in his own copy of Lucian's work, but we know it only from this passage. All the preceding types of transmission, anthologies, collected poems, indirect transmission, have one crucial element in common. The epigrams are part of the literary text copied in manuscripts. Even if they once served a real function, inscribed as epitaph, inscription, caption, epigraph, or the like, they lost it in their new context and have become epideictic literature. Their relationship to their original function is similar to the difference between the preservation of inscriptions in manuscripts and on stone. Now, as we have seen and all you all know, some inscriptions are transmitted in both ways. This is one other example from the Anthologia. This brings us to the epigraphic transmission of our epigrams, or one could say the epigrammatic transmission, if we take into account the dominant Byzantine meaning of the term epigramma, as it appears from the etymological definition in the Suda. Whatever is inscribed or written on something, even if it is not in verse, is called an epigram. Now, this is not the meaning we deal in this conference, of course. And here we are. This is another epigram on an author, on one of his texts, and on a particular manuscript at the same time. The author of the poem, a certain Constantine, addresses Matthew the Evangelist, and he announces the golden words of John Chrysostom that have made the Gospel even more brilliant. The manuscript contains indeed John's commentaries on the Gospel of Matthew. This is a typical book epigram. Book epigrams appear as paratext in manuscripts, mostly preceding, as in this case, or following the main text. One may say that these epigrams perform their original epigraphic function and occupy their real place. And this epigraphic aspect of the text, moreover, is visualized in the script and in the ornamental framing. The epigram is written in large calligraphic gold letters. The Chrysois logois mentioned in the first verse are fittingly announced with golden letters. Here you see other verses that are imitations of inscriptions, this time of inscriptions on icons, frescoes, or mosaics. Unfortunately, some bookbinder has cut off part of the epigram in the Sophia manuscripts. It was all Greek to him. I won't have the time to explain this intriguing riddle. Over lunch, perhaps. The previous examples come from beautifully adorned books, but even in less luxurious manuscripts, the metrical paratexts tend to be written in a distinct handwriting and to be distinguished by non-textual signs from the main text. This is an encomiastic epigram, explicitly so, on Dionysius the Areopagite, following his life. It is expressly introduced as an epigramma. Now the commercial part. It will be clear by now what we mean by book epigrams. You see some definitions, among others by Mark Lauksterman, who, as far as we know, coined the term itself. In our database project, we take book epigrams in a deliberately broad sense. We include all metrical paratexts in manuscripts, or poems that comment on the very object that displays them. Not all of these paratexts are epigrams on authors or texts. Many are simply versified titles, captions explaining miniatures, or colophons by scribes. Yet a good deal does closely correspond to the literary types known from the Anthologia and elsewhere. They praise or criticize the author, a text or a character from the text, or they address the reader. It is our conviction that the collection of this material will be useful for several disciplines within the field of Hellenic studies. It will make available and searchable many thousands of verses that are at present either difficult to retrieve or unedited. Our collaborators start from the manuscript catalogues. Obviously, then, the exhaustivity and reliability of the database will partly depend on the variable quality of the catalogues. Some of the catalogues are very careful, others rather negligent, as it comes to transcribing or even simply mentioning the marginal texts that we are interested in. We realize that our database will never be complete. Especially short book epigrams may have escaped the notice of catalographers or of that of our collaborators. To give a concrete example, this is the famous catalogue of the Lorenziana by Bandini, and a page from his descriptions of the Plutei 5, numbers 24 to 26. This is the same page at left and a zoom, where the book epigrams are indicated in red. The one on Dionysius in the middle column is easily recognizable, since it is printed as a poem and followed by a Latin translation following the verse distribution. Yet, the Psalter manuscript, described in the column at left, also contains a metrical colophon, which is not indicated as such by Bandini. He only says, you can see that, in fine haec ad notata sunt. And then we got 4 verses with one poem. Our database contains both textual and contextual data. We want to collect and provide accurate texts, both diplomatic and critical, of as many book epigrams as possible, and contextual data on all records of the corpus. At present, we have over 5,000 book epigrams, ranging in length from 1 to over 100 verses. We hope to make the database accessible online by the end of next year. It will be searchable according to several parameters. You see, for instance, some possible queries. The structure of the database is devised so as to provide an answer to these different queries. We have made a basic distinction between occurrences and types. Occurrences are the epigrams, the text, as found in the manuscripts, with all their faults and errors. The types are reading texts that regroup one or more occurrences that have the same or very similar text, a kind of critical text it is. Now let me show you some images. This is provisional homepage. Users will be able to search and browse the 4 sections: manuscripts, occurrences, types, and bibliography. One could, for instance, look for all types of epigrams on Thucydides, written in a particular meter. At present, we have 5 different types of these epigrams. The last one occurs in 9 manuscripts, rather popular, as you can see. If we click on the incipit, we get the text. And this is indeed the epigram from the Anthologia Palatina we have seen before. If we scroll down the page, you get the list of all occurrences known to us currently. As you can see, not all records have the Greek text as yet, and this has to do with the information given by the catalogue. We'll have a look at the second one, since it has a remarkable variant reading in the first verse. Friend, if you're a doctor, ietros instead of sophos. Normally, doctors are both, of course, but this is variant reading. The poem turns out to be used at the end of a codex with medical texts, and Thucydides is replaced by gallon in the 4th verse. One result of the changes, there are also changes in the 2nd verse, is that the meter is completely disturbed. Book epigrams, by the way, are also revealing for an evolving sense of classical meter. We have here an interesting case of a phenomenon that is typical of these kind of texts. Book epigrams are used and reused, recycled, appropriated and adapted. They are what's called living text or open texts. The fact that most are anonymous encourages this practice. Moreover, the Thucydides epigram is illustrative of double transmission. Its oldest witness is in fact the Anthologia Palatina, where it has lost its original function, if we presume that the compilers of the anthology have found it in a Thucydides manuscript, where it served as an inscriptional epigram. Most other witnesses are much later. They may have copied the epigram either from their model, the manuscript with Thucydides, or from anthologies such as the one we know. And the latter is especially plausible in the case of the adaptation of the epigram to fit a medical manuscript. Finally, I would like to briefly present a case we are currently exploring, the 14th century manuscript, Conventi Soppressi 98 from Florence, probably a school manuscript. On this slide, you have an overview of the tragic contents of the codex, which is by far the main part. All tragedies come with hypotheses, scholia, glosses, and in all 3 cases we have the Byzantine triad, so the canon curriculum. According to the catalogue, especially the section on Aeschylus includes versiculi, but except for one poem, Rostagno Festa give only the incipit and the decinit, and only vague indications on the place in the manuscript, so unknown. This is the information in the database with the details on the manuscript as it is currently in our database. Only recently did we alter the reproductions of the relevant folia from Florence, and we will be able to update the records shortly. I will show you briefly the full texts from the manuscript, some of which are unique witnesses and 2 of which are previously unedited. Between the end of the Prometheus on top and the hypothesis of the 7 against Thebes, the manuscript includes an epigram that is known from several other witnesses and it has been edited properly by Harrington. Où est Prométhée? The protagonist Prometheus is addressed mockingly, his punishment is well deserved. This is the moral lesson of the first Aeschylean play of the Byzantine school canon. These poems on the 7 against Thebes are also known from other manuscripts where they appear as one whole, starting with the second one, Zitis Theata. This is the poem that addresses the reader or the audience, Theata, as in a tragedy. The short poem is especially remarkable because of the epitheta in verse 2. Patradelphi gets a special meaning when it's used for the sons of Oedipus. It's not just uncle. And tachymori is a rare word, in the classical period only known from Aeschylus, Agamemnon. Perhaps this is not a coincidence in an epigram on Aeschylus. And finally, here are the unedited ones, both on the tragic fate of Xerxes, one in the 3rd and one in the 2nd person, variation on a theme. And the last 2 verses before the separation line are a prayer for strength by the scribe who has yet to start, Sophocles. This is my final slide. The separation line marks the beginning of the section on Sophocles in the manuscript. A laudatory epigram on Sophocles, only preserved in this manuscript as far as we know, announces the vita that starts on the next folio. It has a pun on the name, and it is an author who surpasses his colleagues. This is, well, bookish. Thank you.